my goal this evening is basically just to give you a kind of a brief overview of some of the elements which I think make up a successful interview. First of all, confession is that after kind of working quite hard at school and going to university in Switzerland and the UK, doing a postgraduate diploma, when I went along to my first interviews, I must confess I was pretty bad. You know, I was pretty atrocious. And I think that a lot of people here, I would imagine, invest a lot of time and effort and money into their education. But actually, when it comes down to it, going for that job interview, so much relies on those 30 minutes, 1 hour, whatever it is that you're faced with. And it kind of staggers me that people really don't practice and prepare enough for this very important interview that could change their lives, earn them money and change their lives. So just as a general thing, hands up if you've had an interview. So pretty much everyone. Keep your hands raised if you've practiced or had a role play or any training for an interview. So a couple of people. So basically what I do at Interview Sensei, which is part of EgoTan, which I've been doing for about 3 months now, is training people to take an interview. And most of these people so far have been Japanese candidates who are going along for an interview, maybe with a global company. And all we do is kind of give them a role play, we customize their resume, we try and match the needs of the employer to their qualifications. And in a role play, we give them a chance to kind of get things wrong, to practice, to make mistakes, to get feedback, and to watch themselves on a DVD recorder. So hopefully they can go away and improve. So basically, as you've all had interviews before and are all experts, I'd like to give you a brief little interview quiz. Okay? I'd like you to work on this maybe with your partner, somebody next to you. Could you okay? I called this brief talk 7 steps to interview success, because 7 seems like a good lucky number. And I have 7 slides and there are 7 questions. And I'm not the 7th son of a 7th gypsy king or anything like that. It's no kind of weird little lucky. First of all, I thought about the kinds of interviews I've had in my life. And you know, of course, there's an employment interview, and there's maybe an educational interview. I was thinking more of employment interviews. So what kind of interviews have you had? And what kind of interviews has anyone had? Anyone would like to talk about a couple? Or, you know, I mean like one-on-one, you know, manager.
Yeah, a huge board of people, very far back in the room, on my own, and very nervous, sort of belittling.
Okay, so a panel of people. You know, you could have a group interview where there's like yourself and 3 or 4 other candidates with the panel, or just, as you just described, yourself and the big panel. Any other kind of interviews?
Scenario-based.
Okay, yeah. How does that look?
Again, sort of like a group interview with other people. You may have just met them. You walk in and they say, okay, you're going to be the brand manager for body shop, body shop in Japan or something.
Right.
How do you do it?
Okay, yeah, very good. Kind of behavioural or scenario interviews. Of course, you have telephone interviews. Perhaps to save money or just to identify if you're a good candidate for a face-to-face interview. I had the interview from hell once. Way back, I forget what year, in the mid-80s, I was applying for a job with a political party in the UK, and I had a 3-day residential interview, which involved, you know, personal one-to-one interviews, panel interviews, doing a group task, and of course dinner, you know, and it was amazing. Some people, you know, I was like gently sipping my wine. No, I won't finish the bottle just yet. And but some of the people, you know, on every table was an interviewer assessing us, and like one guy was picking arguments all the time, yeah, and I thought, no, he's not going to make it, and he didn't. So there are many kinds of interviews you can face, but the first step and I think this is the most important step of all, is research the company. It is such an obvious, but I've been doing interview practice for the last 3 months now with about 5 to 10 people a week, going for fairly, high-powered jobs. This is like a real role play for a job. I have been amazed how few people actually know very much about the position, the company, or the environment of which this company operates. And it is so easy these days. You just go onto the website. And for non-native speakers, going onto the English website, I think it's great, because it kind of gives you the vocabulary, the key buzzwords of the company that you can actually use or recycle in the interview. If they haven't got a website, perhaps they're a small company, I don't know if they have an HR department you could ring or contact, or ask some friends if they know about the company. But there's so many ways to actually find out. And I think it's the number one most important step, and it's the number one most important thing that will impress your interviewer by knowing the company. Okay? Let's look at question number 2 on your worksheet. There's 3 common interview questions you might expect to be asked. Now, if you pick up any kind of book on interviews or go to any website, commonly asked questions, what kind of questions, or in your own experience, what questions always come up? Who are you? Who are you? Okay.
Why this company?
Why this company? Yeah, good one. Always comes up. Why are you applying for this job? Why this company? Is it any job you're looking for, or this particular company? Any others?
Strengths and weaknesses?
Strengths and weaknesses, a really good one, yeah. Always, every interview I've ever been to, what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses? How would you summarise these? One of the things when I mentioned about going for this political job interview, I actually passed the interview, whether that was good or bad, I'm not sure. But one of the things we were always taught in this political job was always talk about things in 3s. So if you're going to talk about your strengths, always talk about 3 strengths, 1 weakness, 3 strengths, 1 weakness. Yeah, but strengths and weaknesses, always a very common question. Anything else? Any other questions? Sorry? What's your objective? Yeah. What's maybe your career objective, or why do you want this job? Yeah. What are your achievements? Yeah. Usually the interview will follow a bit of small talk. Hello. How are you today? Is it still raining? Followed by educational qualifications. Then going into professional background. Then it might be the behavioural, what if, strengths and weaknesses, and so on. And then perhaps any questions you'd like to ask me. It follows a regular flow. I mean, probably in major companies, these people interview hundreds of candidates, so they kind of have a scenario or a little system of flowing down. So, the main point I wish to make is that step number 2 is like a good Boy Scout in the UK or the US, prepare and practice. Review the qualifications on your resume and see how they match the needs of the job. Review the most common interview questions, and in your own mind, know what you're going to say. I mean, just practice in your own mind. If you don't have a kind of suitable role play person you can practice with. And also kind of be aware of your body language. Not just the verbal responses you're making, but do you do things with your hands? Do you look away, or do you nod, or do you rock back and forth? Be aware of this. So practice how you're going to act and what you're going to say. Okay? Preparation and practice, I think steps 1 and 2 are the most fundamental and most important steps. Okay, let's look at number 3, question 3. How long does it usually take for someone to form a first impression on you? First impressions, how long?
1 second.
1 second. Any advance on 1 second?
Less than a second.
Do I hear?
Less than a second.
Less than a second. Ooh. Well, I read less than 5 seconds. It depends on the person. But a first impression, less than 5 seconds. So, step number 3, the first impression. And, you know, a lot of this is just common sense, but again, I think it's like good to have a mental checklist. Be on time. You know, I tend to arrive very early for things that I have to do, but there's no harm in arriving early. It's better than arriving late. If you arrive early, review your notes, or walk around, have a coffee, or whatever. My last boss always said his first impression, and don't forget, some interviewers have weird idiosyncrasies. They're not always the kind of doing it from a manual. My ex-boss said, I always look at somebody's shoes. If they're neatly polished, then I know they're organized. So, you know, whatever, you know, dress sense, be conservative, but be... That's why I got fired. You know, create a good first impression. One of the things that we actually do in the interview sensei is in the role play, is come in and shake hands. You know, and I think a good firm handshake, good eye contact, and an introduction is essential. Nerves are apparent in all of the people I've ever interviewed, you know, but to overcome nerves or to use nerves as a focal point for good, I think if you've prepared and practiced, then you know you're going to give it your best shot. Okay? So the first impression, I think, is very, very, very important. Okay, next question. Think of a success story in your professional career. How would you explain this? Has anyone kind of got a good success story they could just very quickly summarize?
I have one.
Okay.
Okay. I was working at SoftBank, and we had done an M&A deal, and we had acquired a company in Helsinki, Finland.
Okay.
And this was, some time went on, and relations were kind of getting further and further away between the Japanese company and the guys in Finland. So much so that at one winter night, I got a call that they were the CEO of Finland was going to leave the company. So I flew out there, and I spent the next week or so working on them and got them all to basically stay on board. And so that was a tough thing. It was because basically there was a lot of things under the bridge that they were ready to go. And so basically working with them, selling them on the idea of what we could build together, and then getting them on board.
Good story, good story. And I think this emphasizes this point, play to your strengths. And I think what the story you just told, one of the things I think is good to prepare is a success story. And I kind of learned that there's a good little acronym for this, which is STAR, S-T-A-R. I don't know if you've ever heard of this before, but you've just done that very well. The situation, this was the situation, right? This was my task, the T. This was the action I performed, and R, this was the result. And I think that if you prepare this ahead of your interview, then it's a really good thing to have up your sleeve when somebody says, what are your strengths and weaknesses? Tell me of a successful story or a task that you implemented in your position. Okay? So play to your strengths. Know what you have to offer. I'm amazed with so many Japanese candidates that I give the interview practice to. They're so modest. You know, invented the 56K modem might be kind of tucked away under other information. You know, bring out your strengths and play to them. The other thing which I mentioned earlier was the threes. I think the classic question, what about your strengths and weaknesses? I think always do 3 strengths. You know, I've got good communication skills, I get on well with people, and I'm a good results-oriented manager. And you give 1 weakness. You know, if you're going to balance it, don't balance it in a negative way. So play to your strengths. Okay, moving on. Next one. What would you consider to be your main weakness? Choose the best response from the 3 options below. A, B, C. A, B, C. That's the truth. Who thinks A? I'm not so good at speaking Japanese, but I am going to a language school to try and improve. Who thinks A is the best response? Okay. Who thinks B is the best response? I'm not a good man manager. No? And C, I work too hard and expect others to do the same. Okay, so split between A and C with B and O. Well, again, the answer I get most from my Japanese interview candidates is C. I work too hard and expect others to do the same. I would say this isn't a weakness. I would say it's evading the question. And I think there are three ways you can answer this question. One is overemphasis. You know, I'm not a good man manager. I mean, this is an interview. You're trying to show how good you are, not how poor you are. You don't have to tell lies, but don't emphasize something which you consider to be weakness. Then you have evasive. I'm a perfectionist. I work too hard and expect others to work hard as well. I just don't think that is an answer. And HR people who hear this over and over and over again actually think it's a very weak answer. So, admit to a small weakness. I mean, this is not a heart-wrenching psychological sort of discussion. Admit to a small weakness. Well, my Japanese ability could be a bit better. And then show how you're overcoming it. But I'm going to language school to improve. Or I'm taking a correspondence course. Okay, so I think that is much better in the way of being honest. So avoid negative statements, but if you're going to admit to a weakness, show how you're overcoming it, not dwelling on it. I think the same thing as well goes to why do you want to leave your present job? Avoid negative statements about your present job, about your previous employers. It just creates a bad impression in the interview. Maybe you've had terrible problems. I think something like 70% of all people who resign actually do so because dissatisfaction with their direct manager. So, but if you admit that, then possibly the person interviewing you will think you're a troublemaker or not a desirable employee or whatever. So I think avoid that kind of negative feeling. And also they might say, what's your success story? They might also say, tell me something where things didn't go so well. So if you're going to have a failure story or something that didn't go so well, I think the emphasis should be on what you learned from it, rather than the actual mistake that you may or may not have made. Okay, next one. How would you respond to this question, number 6? What if I asked you to work on a project with a colleague you didn't get along with? One of these kind of behavioural questions, or like a scenario question. Any ideas how you'd respond to this?
Look for some more information about the situation.
Okay, look for some more information about the situation.
Okay, I would ask the question, are these colleagues task or relationship oriented?
Okay, task or relationship oriented people. Okay, yeah. I mean, you'd ask the interviewer this.
Yeah.
I actually think, again, this doesn't really match exactly, but listen to the interviewer. What does the interviewer really want to hear? Yeah, a response which is positive and which will get the job done. So I think that what you're saying is actually correct. I mean, you're taking a sensible and logical approach. But I think what the interviewer wants to hear is something like, well, you know, as long as we can get the job done, then I think that's fine. Or something to that effect, you know? I mean, that's a little bit too short maybe, and maybe not as considered. But what does he want to hear? You know, think about that. Listen very carefully, and what does he want to hear? I would say don't lie to the interviewer, but if it's a difficult question that maybe you don't want to give a direct answer to, then maybe circumnavigate and see what his real purpose is. One of the things I get a lot with Japanese candidates is when I ask a question during the interview, is a silence. And I think it's good to pause to consider your answer, but a silence that goes on for too long is obviously not desirable. So again, for a non-native speaker, I think some kind of checking the question is not sure rather than prolonging the silence. Okay, let's look at the final step. Give one example of a question you could end the interview with. Traditionally, an interviewer will say, Right, do you have any questions for me? So what's the kind of question that you would ask? Have you got any good holiday homes for the weekend? What kind of bonus can I expect?
Something I usually try to ask is why should I work for you? I try to spin it around.
That's a challenging question.
Yeah. Which puts you in a position, I think, whereby they need to sell the company to you. Like, obviously, they're looking for somebody with your skill set, so.
That's the right question. I mean, that's a good question, yeah. Why not? If you kind of got 50 jobs lined up and you can pick and choose. But I think it's a little bit kind of aggressive to an interviewer. I always think an interviewer, let's say there's 5 jobs going on. He's probably got 50 people lined up. And he's probably got his interview schedule planned. So he doesn't want to get into really long philosophical debates. You know, Wittgenstein said in this work, blah, blah, blah. I mean, keep the question relevant, but make it look, I think, as though you've done some research into the company. So one of the questions I always recommend to my candidates is something like, when I was researching your company, I learned that you'd recently acquired company X in China. Is this part of an overall expansion into Asia? I don't know, something like that. It shows that you've actually done some research. Maybe that might be a bit too detailed. But to ask something that the interviewer can respond in a positive way. And perhaps that's why they're interviewing for additional positions. And then I also like the supplementary question. I mean, you're not going to sit there and ask 3 or 4 or 5 questions. He's got a schedule to keep to. But to show that you're listening, going back to the other point. Yes, we've actually just bought this company in China, and it's for strategic purposes. Oh, I see. And are there any other strategic kind of reasons for going into the Chinese market? Whatever. You know, show that you've been listening and ask a little supplementary question to follow on. So those basically are my very short 7 steps, which takes me up to my closing time. So if you would like to find out more about more rigorous interview preparation and practice training, then please come along to Ego Town. Thank you very much.